Good morning and welcome to yet another edition of Survival Skills 11's show. You're watching me, Kevin Williams here, and I'll be keeping you entertained for the next 20 minutes or so with some topical news, some controversial views and some better biking tips. So stay tuned, and what we'll take you through this morning is, what have we got for you? Bunch of stories. There wasn't much going on in the news actually the last couple of days, but I managed to find a few things. Drink drive teen who crashed on a beach loses his license. An interesting BMJ article about motorcycling and stress relief. Oxford waterproof socks, how much? I shall tell you, and I will also have a quick look at the inaugural Moto America King of the Baggers race at Laguna Seca, and I'll give you the URL to watch some highlights of that as well. So sit yourself down with your brew and stay tuned for the next 20 minutes or so. Don't forget, if you have any questions, any comments, any feedback on the show, anything you'd like me to cover, in fact, do drop me a line and I will try to get back to you either at the end of the show or in due course in another show. Right, okay, so what have we got for you today? Well, during lockdown, when training schools were shut or only dealing with essential workers, there was quite a lot of discussion online about how a new rider could be introduced to a motorcycle. CBTs were hard to come by, obviously, so one of the things that people were suggesting was that you took your bike out to a sort of car park or a forecourt of an industrial unit on an industrial estate, and that you let somebody try it out there. Well, there's obviously two risks with that. If you've ever tried to teach anybody to ride a motorcycle and you're not a motorcycle instructor, the results are often fairly spectacularly disastrous. People regularly crash because they haven't really got much clue what they're trying to do with a bike, and however well-meaning you are, if you don't really know what you're doing, it is difficult to explain exactly how to get moving on a motorcycle for the first time. But the real point here is that people say, well, it's off-road, isn't it? So it's fine. It's not actually on the road. I would point out that you actually need license, insurance, and all the rest of it to actually use these bits of road. But people would say, no, it doesn't matter. It's not on the road. Unfortunately, that's because a lot of riders don't understand that road traffic laws, the normal road traffic laws, don't just apply to the road. They apply to anywhere where the public ordinarily has access. And there was a case some years ago where a man was arrested for drink driving at Dover Docks. As far as I recall, all he was doing was moving the car from one part of the car park to another part. But he had a couple of beers and he turned out to be over the limit, and he was done for drink driving even though he wasn't on the public roads. And he appealed, and he lost again at the appeal for the very reason I've just pointed out, that the docks are an area which is ordinarily available to the public to drive on. And a similar case actually went to court last week, where a teenager was offered a ride on a motorcycle on Aberdeen Beach back in April. He had no experience of riding, and he had also been drinking, which might have had something to do with his decision to jump on the bike. But 19-year-old Derek McGanley rode off along the waterline at what was described as speed. Unfortunately, he crashed into a rock and a wooden dike and injured himself. Unfortunately, he wasn't wearing a helmet either. And seeing that he had a head injury, passer-by called the emergency services. So the police and the ambulance both attended. Though he refused medical treatment, the police breath tested him, and it turned out to be positive. He was therefore arrested, taken to Kitty Brewster Police Station, and then the Aberdeen Royal Infirmary. Although his injuries were found not to be serious, while he was at the hospital, he was obliged to give a blood sample, which confirmed the over-the-limit result of the breath test. So the upshot of all this was he had to plead guilty to careless driving, driving without insurance, and driving over the limit. Result, he got a ban for 12 months and he was fined £200 all for a quick spin up the beach on somebody else's motorcycle. So don't be tempted, basically. Somebody says it's perfectly all right, you're off road. It isn't. You have to be on private property. That is the distinction. All right. Okay. So moving on. The British Medical Journal has never been particularly supportive of motorcycling. In fact, I'd go as far to say that it's usually been rabidly anti-bike. It's not surprising, really, I suppose, that the medical journal would be interested in reducing injuries, but its publication standards haven't always been entirely objective, in my opinion. As an example, it published a deeply flawed study from New Zealand around 10 or 12 years ago, which claimed to show that light coloured clothing had a positive effect on reducing motorcycle injuries. Having read the paper and read it quite carefully, what I thought was it produced little evidence for that. But what it did show was that the riders who did crash, the risks were associated with being unlicensed, being disqualified, being drunk, and being inexperienced, which are all well-known factors. And I wasn't the only one to spot that, as it happens. And the follow-up edition of the magazine had a letter from a doctor who'd seen much the same flaws as I had. And he was very deeply critical of the study, and a bit of debate went back and forth. But unfortunately, the article had already been published. It remained published, and it's now widely quoted in other studies as supporting evidence for using high-vis clothing and day riding lights. And frankly, it should never have got past the peer review stage. But anyway, so I was rather surprised to see an article entitled Why I Ride a Motorcycle, which actually shows the very positive side of biking. Now, this was an interview with an anaesthetist, a chap called Andrew Cole, and he was speaking to a BMJ journalist, Francesca Robinson, and he explained how riding his motorcycle helped him be distracted from the work stress. Having said that the article is positive, of course, the temptation to pop in the usual motorcycles dangerous statistic couldn't be overlooked. So the article starts by stating that motorcycling is, to quote, one of the most dangerous ways of travelling by road, and then gives a DFT statistic to say that per mile travelled, the risk of death for a motorcyclist is at least 57 times higher than for that of a car occupant. They got that from some 2013 figures. And they took a mild dig at middle-aged men becoming born-again bikers. But the overall picture is that they paint motorcycling in this article in a positive light. Dr. Coe, who's 61, says there are many reasons to be a biker. He says, to quote, firstly, for a motorcyclist, a bike is a thing of beauty and skilled design. And he then goes on to cite the need for heightened awareness when riding. He says, even on quieter roads, you don't think about anything but riding the bike. It's too dangerous a task to let your mind wander. It's a far more demanding skill than driving a car. And he says that he uses the risks of riding to actually ground himself for his work. And again, to quote, any worries about a lack of intensive care beds, funding cuts, irritating colleagues, or even COVID-19 are, by then, fully in perspective. So, Coe rides a street triple. That's what his everyday bike is. That's what he uses to get to work, but he's also got a Suzuki sports bike, which he says he rides at weekends. And as he's lucky enough to live in North Lincolnshire, I know for a fact he's got some stunning roads up there to ride on. And of course, he's well placed for track days at Cadwell Park, which he does. And he's also a member of a motorcycle club for doctors called Quick Quacks, who go off together on trips touring to places like Scotland or Europe. There was quite an interesting article there, because Dr. Coe isn't alone in finding that biking has some positive side effects. A Dr. Ruita Kawashima even went a bit further. Now, he is a self-professed motorcycle fan, but he conducted an objective study at the University of Tokyo back in 2009, and he looked at middle-aged riders, 40 to 50, and what he found was that they had improved levels of cognitive function. after riding their bikes on a daily basis. He looked at regular riders who are already obviously riding on a regular basis, and he also looked at others who hadn't ridden for 10 years. And what he did was he got the non-riding riders back onto motorcycles, and then he tested both groups to see what was happening in their brains. And what he found was that anybody who has ridden or is riding a motorcycle actually uses their brain in a slightly different way. And both the current riders and the returning riders turned out to have a higher level of concentration, because specific segments of the brain, and to be, if you want the precise location, it's the right hemisphere of the prefrontal frontal lobe, was activated. And when the riders got back on the bikes, he said he was able to detect improved cognitive faculties, particularly those relating to memory and spatial reasoning capacity, amongst those returning riders. So there are very, very definite positives from riding a motorcycle. Now, he also found as an added benefit that participants self-reported that their stress levels had been reduced and their mental state changed for the better. So he was asked, why doesn't driving a car have the same effect? And what he said was that a car is a comfortable machine which does not activate our brain. And he basically concluded that riding a motorcycle requires a higher level of alertness and more rapid problem solving than driving a car. And what he said was that a driver's brain gets activated by riding motorcycles. So although the general perception of motorcycling is better than it was when I first started riding a motorcycle, I think we can do with more articles like this, quite frankly. All good news. So what else have I got to tell you? Oops, that's the wrong photo. I'll get the right one up in a moment. So while we're talking about the relief of mental stress and the agility, then I'll just take the opportunity to remind you that my courses are still available. At this time of the year, what I do is take bookings on short notice, coincide with days when the weather is likely to be fine, and we'll usually start at 12 noon, which gives any early morning fog or damp roads a chance to clear and dry out. Today and Thursday, we have the remains of Hurricane Epsilon dragging their way across the UK, and that'll be blustery showers today and then heavy rain tomorrow. So the next decent days actually look like Friday and Saturday here in the London area. And then Hurricane Zeta arrives with more rain for Sunday and Monday. So if you're interested in some mentally stimulating rider development, let me know. I do have both Friday and Saturday still open to bookings. In other news, I've put a bunch of the new old Facebook posts up on my coffee site. Those are from May 2016, so that's a total of now 225 better biking articles available to you, and you can access that resource for just £3. That's all it costs for a month's access. And don't forget as well, if you want to stay dry and warm, you can also do that with the online coaching sessions. They're also available. It's the same client-based training, but it's delivered remotely. Tell me what you want and I'll set up a session for you. And these sessions can be run pretty much any time, weekdays, weekends, daytime and evening, to suit you. So they're educational, they're convenient, and they're warm. Right, okay, so moving on rapidly. Last time out, I mentioned the Exo Tog inflatable bubble wrap vest, which puts a layer of insulating air between the rider and the outside world, thereby helping you stay warm. And I said it was neat execution, but at £97, it was a crazy price. Well, something else we'll probably be wanting to do at this time of year is keep our feet dry. There are waterproof boots out there, but there are alternative ways of keeping feet dry, and one is to use waterproof socks. Now, Oxford Products, never a company to undersell their product line, have produced their own brand of waterproof socks, which you can now see before you, and they are, naturally enough, available in a motorcycle store near you. They are said to be waterproof, windproof, breathable, with a cushioned areas and a light compression fit, available for the bargain price of £39.99. Or is it a bargain price? Well, it is until you realise that you can get perfectly functional waterproof socks from hiking suppliers for a fraction of the price. Those are made by Dex Shell. I've got a pair of those myself. They set me back under £20 on eBay. They're about 22 retail. They're comfortable, they're 3 years old, and they're still 100% waterproof. So yes, it's all very well flogging the kit out there, but have a think about what you're buying. You can sometimes do a better deal by going for non-motorcycle specific riding kit. But I'll tell you what, they are lovely when they keep your feet dry. So definitely a good idea if you don't have waterproof boots. Right, okay. Baggers, what are they all about? I've never been entirely sure. Somebody defined it as a cruiser with saddlebags, but it doesn't really explain the styling, which seems to be tailed down. And to me, that always looks as if you're going to lose your passenger at the first takeoff from a green traffic light. So I'm not quite certain about what the baggers are all about. And I have to say, I don't get the huge piece of bodywork that covers the bars, but leaves your head out in the wind blast. I mean, what's all that about, unless it's simply to provide a convenient mounting point for a set of speakers that would be better suited to a pub gig? I really don't know. And what about the saddlebags? Well, they're not saddlebags really, are they? They're hard panniers. They're certainly not throw over the seat, which is what I would call saddlebag. And touring, well, I don't know. They always look about big enough for a sort of double portion of haddock and chips to me. Some throw in some weights, the wheelbase, the handling of a small truck, and I've never quite understood their appeal. Maybe somewhere in the US there's a road that suits them, but quite frankly, each to their own, and they're not mine. However, if you build a bike, someone somewhere will try to race it. And that's exactly what has happened at Laguna Seca in California. If I can get the right picture up again. Here we go. Have a look at that. The Moto America series put a race on for baggers. Predictably, it was Harley versus Indian, but it does appear that some fairly serious money was thrown at some of those bikes by some of America's best-known race teams. Vance and Hines had an entry, and so did Roland Sands. Now, the result, I have to admit, was a bit like watching downhill skiers attempting the Hahnenkamm at Kitzbühel on the T-tray. It was crazily inappropriate, ridiculously entertaining, and predictably fiercely competitive at the front. I should just watch the final overtake by Tyler O'Hara, where he dived up the inside of Hayden Gillam at the top of the corkscrew. It's a bit of a classic. So have a look at this. Here is the URL to the YouTube highlight video. It's well worth watching for a few minutes. Anyway, come back to the better biking bit of the show. There's a vaguely serious point to be made from this, and that's to say that when it comes to riding bikes, it's almost always the rider that is the limiting factor. Sure, you can push something like a bagger to the limits where you're grinding bits of undercarriage and fiberglass on the road, but the rider can do that if the rider is up to it. One of my constant frustrations at the moment is this obsession with technology that we've got at the moment. It's both the manufacturer's side of things and it's the prospective purchasers as well. It's fairly obvious why manufacturers have gone the route. It's cheaper to build in electronics with today's fly-by-wire engines and transmissions than it is to develop these things mechanically. And of course, you can also take a single engine and you can produce various versions, different power outputs, different engine characteristics for different applications. But riders get too hung up on it, in my opinion. I was reading with a sort of open mouth an online discussion, a quite serious one the other day, about the relative benefits of two bikes, which had come down in the end to which had the better rain mode. Now, if that really is the deciding factor, I'm kind of baffled, really, because I doubt, quite frankly, that the average rider will be able to tell the difference between one and the other. But anyway, there you go. The motorcycle itself will be far more important than what the electronics do. So is there a balance between technology and skills? Well, I think so. Yeah, definitely. Maybe 10 years ago, I was having a relatively heated online discussion with a rider who felt that her machine, it was one of the older steel framed CBR 600s, the last steel framed model, in fact. She felt that it was a bike that was holding back her development. Um, she felt that because she was riding this bike, her riding wasn't improving under the tutelage of her advanced group. And specifically, what she said was it was the tyres, the suspension, and the brakes not being up to snuff. And that she thought her riding would be instantly upgraded if she jumped onto a newer, more modern machine with higher tech tyres, brakes, suspension, and all the rest of it. And it seemed to me that she was actually very fixated on her own shortcomings and blaming the bike for not getting on. So I suggested that she learned to work with what she already had, but I didn't actually succeed in getting the message over. And I have to admit that at one moment I did actually write it. A good rider can corner well on a wallowing hippo of a machine. Possibly not very subtle, but I was getting very frustrated with the discussion. Anyway, if you watch the video, I think the overtake there by Tyler O'Hara into the top of the corkscrew makes my point quite nicely. It's one of the classic overtaking spots that Laguna Seca, but if you get it wrong, it's liable to go rubber side up very quickly indeed as you go into the corkscrew itself. And I've seen some spectacular crashes over the years there on some, World Superbike entries. So clearly not a bike which is being held back by its technology. Anyway, to return to the woman that I had the online discussion with, she treated herself to a brand new Fireblade. Guess what? She still struggled. So she spent the best part of 10K at that time and then realized that the problem wasn't actually the bike. So I finally talked her into doing a 2-hour riding session with me. And 15 minutes or so watching her on a twisty road confirmed the problems. It was the classic cornering clusterfuck problem. She was running in too fast on a closed throttle. Because she was running in too fast, she was turning in too early. And because she was turning in too early, she was running wide on the exit. So she was offline, off the pace, and struggling to get the bike turned and accelerated out of the bend. So the next 75 minutes or so on the road was all about targeted coaching to overcome those pressing problems. I had to do some hard work to persuade her to use the brakes positively into the tight corners because she'd been taught not to use the brakes. Then, having got the speed off, it was relatively straightforward to get her to go a little bit deeper into the corner so she could see her way out of the bend rather than cutting in too early. But that did require some more positive counter-steering, which again went against what she'd been taught, which was to be nice and gentle with the inputs and be smooth. We can be perfectly smooth while being positive. They're not countering each other. But being more positive with the steering means you get the bike pointed where you want to go next more quickly. And then you can get back on the throttle because you know where you're going next. So that took about 75 minutes. So that was about 90 minutes all told of our 2-hour course. And it left 30 minutes or so for her to actually put it all together. Result, big grin. It suddenly twigged. She actually got the idea that on the faster, more open corners, she could use the techniques that she'd been using, but it was the tighter, twistier stuff where she really needed to change her approach and be a lot more positive with the machine inputs. But I suppose what was frustrating about all this was that she had to be doing this on her Fireblade. And she had been getting just the same results out of her old steel-framed CBR with its basic right way up suspension, basic what are they called? The brakes, standard disc brakes, and the older tyres, the narrower wheels. It would have been just as capable of doing what she was doing on those roads that she was using her brand new Fireblade on. So today's tip, in short, learn to ride what you have. Don't look to biking technology to solve fundamental riding issues. At best, all you'll be doing is papering over the cracks, but at worst, you'll actually be parting with a lot of cash for no benefit. As always, if you can't fix the problem yourself, get some training from someone who can. Right, and on that note, it's time to sign off from yet another show. I'll be back with the next broadcast on Sunday. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy the bagger racing. Let me know what you think about that. I think it was quite good fun. And anyway, see you in a few days' time. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.